Barry Sheene lost the 1979 British Grand Prix by 0.03 of a second. 3 months later, Suzuki let their two-time world champion walk away without fighting to keep him. At Silverstone in August 1979, Sheen rode one of the greatest races in motorcycle history on a Suzuki he told them was wrong. He'd been outvoted on equipment choice. His mechanical warnings were ignored all season. This wasn't about one race. It was about how Suzuki systematically dismantled their own champion the moment he stopped being easy to control. The truth about what happened reveals how factories treat riders once they stop being useful. In 1973, Suzuki signed Barry Sheene when he was just another fast British rider with more ambition than results. They gave him factory bikes, unlimited support, and the freedom to speak his mind about anything. That last part would eventually destroy their relationship. Sheene wasn't like other factory riders. He didn't bow to Japanese corporate culture. He didn't smile politely when engineers made decisions he thought was wrong. And he absolutely refused to pretend dangerous equipment was acceptable just because it came from the factory. This worked perfectly when Suzuki needed a personality to sell motorcycles. Sheen was everything they wanted in a brand ambassador. Good looking, quotable, famous beyond the racing paddock. He dated models, he partied with rock stars, he showed up at Buckingham Palace to receive an MBE from the Queen. Motorcycle racing had never seen anyone market themselves like Sheen did. He wasn't just fast, he was famous. By 1969, Sheen was earning more than any other motorcycle racer on Earth. The exact figure was never published, but rivals estimated over $100,000 annually just from Suzuki. Add in endorsement deals for Brut Cologne, television appearances, and race bonuses, and Sheen was a millionaire doing something most people considered a hobby. He won the 500cc World Championship in 1976. He defended it in 1977. Suzuki celebrated both titles with massive publicity campaigns that positioned Sheen as the face of their racing program. The championships transformed Suzuki's image completely. Before Sheen, they were known for small commuter bikes and trail motorcycles, reliable but boring, safe transportation for people who needed to get to work. After his back-to-back titles, Suzuki became synonymous with performance and winning. Dealerships reported increased showroom traffic. Young riders walked in asking about the same bike Sheen raced. Sales of the street versions of the race bike jumped dramatically. Marketing departments around the world used Sheen's image to sell everything from helmets to leather jackets. He wasn't just winning races for Suzuki. He was building their entire brand identity in markets where Japanese manufacturers still fought for respect against European tradition. Suzuki wasn't just selling motorcycles anymore, they were selling a lifestyle, and Sheen was the face of that lifestyle. His number 7 became iconic, his racing leathers became fashion, his attitude became aspirational. For young riders in the 70s, Barry Sheene represented everything motorcycle racing could be: fast, glamorous, dangerous, and profitable. Suzuki couldn't have asked for a better ambassador. But underneath the celebrations and magazine covers, cracks were forming. Sheen's outspoken personality that made him famous was also making him difficult to manage. He publicly criticized dangerous racetracks when other riders stayed silent. He pushed for better safety standards when factories wanted to focus on performance. He complained loudly when Suzuki's equipment wasn't good enough, embarrassing engineers who expected loyalty and discretion. For a few years, Suzuki tolerated this because winning championships justified the headaches. By 1978, that tolerance was disappearing. But then 1978 happened, and a rider nobody expected showed up and completely destroyed Sheen's championship run. This is where everything started to fall apart. Kenny Roberts arrived in 1978 and won the 500cc World Championship in his first season on circuits he'd never seen before. This wasn't supposed to happen. Roberts was an American dirt track specialist with zero road racing experience in Europe. Sheen had years of knowledge, factory Suzuki equipment, and 2 consecutive championships. Roberts beat him anyway. Roberts brought a completely different riding style to Grand Prix racing. He hung off the bike in corners, dragging his knee on the pavement. European riders thought it looked ridiculous, until they realized it was faster. Roberts could carry more speed because his body position lowered the center of gravity and allowed steeper lean angles. Sheen watched this American newcomer rewrite the rulebook on riding technique while simultaneously exposing weaknesses in Suzuki's development program that nobody wanted to acknowledge. The problem was bigger than just riding style. Roberts had factory Yamaha support, full development, engineers who listened to his feedback and made changes. Meanwhile, Sheen was discovering that his feedback to Suzuki was increasingly being ignored. Not openly rejected, just quietly set aside. Development priorities were shifting, and Sheen wasn't the priority anymore. Sheen blamed the 1978 championship loss on his team's refusal to replace a crankshaft bearing he'd heard failing during practice at the Finnish Grand Prix. He requested the part be changed. Suzuki mechanics disagreed and refused. The engine failed during the race. That mechanical failure cost Sheen crucial points that would have kept him in championship contention. The outspoken Sheen publicly criticized his team's decision. This public criticism marked a turning point in Suzuki's attitude towards their champion. Factory teams operate on hierarchy and respect. You don't embarrass your employers in front of the world media. Sheen had done exactly that. The fact that he was right about the mechanical failure didn't matter. He'd broken an unspoken rule about loyalty. Suzuki's management in Japan took notice. The rider they'd paid more than anyone in racing history had just humiliated them publicly. That kind of behavior has consequences. For 1979, Suzuki made a decision that should have been a warning sign. Before the season started, they asked their 3 top riders to vote on which version of the new factory race bike they preferred. Sheen, Virginio Ferrari, and Will Hartog each tested 2 different designs. This sounded democratic. It wasn't. It was Suzuki's way of taking decision-making power away from Sheen. He was outvoted when Ferrari and Hartog chose the motorcycle he had rejected. Sheen was forced to ride their choice rather than his preferred option. Think about that for a moment. Suzuki's reigning 2-time world champion told them which bike handled better. They gave him the other one anyway. This wasn't about fairness or team democracy. This was about control. Suzuki was reminding Sheen he didn't run the team anymore. The 1979 season would prove he'd been right all along, but by then it wouldn't matter. And everything came to a head in August at one race. The race that would prove Sheen was still the fastest rider in the world. The race Suzuki would watch and then walk away from him anyway. August 12, 1979, Silverstone Circuit, the British Grand Prix. Roberts was about to wrap up his 2nd consecutive world championship. Sheen had no real chance at the title, but winning in front of his home crowd against the American who'd beaten him 2 years running became an obsession. Silverstone in 1979 was even faster than it is now, with an average lap speed of 117 miles per hour compared to 107 today. The circuit demanded absolute commitment through high-speed sections where mistakes meant hospital visits or worse. Sheen knew every inch of the track, but he also knew his Suzuki wasn't as fast as Roberts' Yamaha in a straight line. The pressure on Sheen going into this race was immense. British fans expected him to win on home soil. The media had built up his rivalry between him and Roberts into a national competition. Britain versus America, Suzuki versus Yamaha, the establishment versus the upstart. Sheen carried all of that weight onto the grid, knowing his bike wasn't competitive enough to guarantee victory. He would have to extract every last bit of performance from his machinery his own team had built against his recommendations. The race began with Barry Sheene, Kenny Roberts and Will Hartog breaking away from the rest of the field. Within a few laps, Hartog fell back, leaving Sheen and Roberts to fight alone. What followed was 28 laps of the closest racing motorcycle Grand Prix had ever seen. Millions of British television viewers tuned in thanks to the BBC showing the race live. 2 premier-class greats ripping around the famous Woodcock corner at 200 km per hour onto the start-finish straight left viewers and packed grandstands spellbound. Sheen was riding beyond what his Suzuki could reasonably do. He was making up for horsepower deficits with corner speed and bravery that bordered on reckless. Every lap brought the crowd to their feet. Sheen would lead through the technical sections where his skill advantage showed. Roberts would retake the lead on the straights where his Yamaha's power advantage mattered. Neither rider gave an inch. Neither made mistakes. The battle was so intense that 3rd place finished over half a minute behind them. The tension built with every lap. Spectators who'd seen decades of racing said they'd never witnessed anything like it. 2 champions operating at absolute peak performance. No team orders, no strategy, just pure racing where the fastest rider on each section of track took the lead. The crowd noise was deafening every time Sheen went past. This was their champion fighting an impossible battle on equipment that should have been competitive. And somehow, he was winning. Heading into the final lap, the pair encountered slower riders. Roberts routed them with relative ease, but Sheen couldn't follow and was held up as he attempted to take the outside route. The incident should have ended the race. Roberts had a gap. Sheen had run out of laps. But what happened next became racing legend. Sheen broke the lap record on the last lap, more than 1.5 seconds faster than his qualifying time, to challenge Roberts right at the finish. The number 7 Suzuki had momentum, but with Roberts placing his Yamaha towards the outside of the circuit, there was nowhere for Sheen to go. Sheen lost his home Grand Prix by 0.03 of a second, 0.03 of a second, less time than it takes to blink. Roberts said years later that Silverstone was definitely one of his most special wins. Anytime he could beat Sheen on the last lap was special. For Sheen, the loss was devastating. He'd ridden the perfect race on imperfect equipment and come within a breath of victory. More importantly, he'd proven he was still fast enough to win world championships. The bike just wasn't good enough. Sheen had just delivered one of the greatest performances of his career. You'd think Suzuki would finally listen to him. They didn't, and when the season ended, the numbers revealed just how deep the betrayal went. The 1979 season ended with results that exposed the depth of Suzuki's betrayal. Despite winning more races than any other Suzuki rider in 1979, Sheen finished the season in third place, 2 points behind his teammate Virginio Ferrari. Sheen won more races than anyone else on a Suzuki. He still finished behind a teammate. This happened because Ferrari was riding for a different Suzuki team. Ferrari rode for Galena Suzuki, a privateer operation that bought customer bikes from the factory but developed them independently. Meanwhile, Sheen was on the Works Heron Suzuki team with supposedly full factory support. Except by 1979, that factory support had quietly evaporated. The mechanical failures that plagued Sheen all season weren't random bad luck, they were systemic neglect. When your champion reports hearing problems and you ignore him, that's not mechanical failure, that's management failure. When customer teams using your older equipment outperform your factory effort, that's not rider failure, that's development failure. According to later interviews, Sheen had demanded a staggering salary increase for 1979 and Suzuki agreed to pay it, but they had to kill off their entire motocross team, trials team, and everything else just to fund his salary. This version of events, reported years later, reveals Suzuki's growing resentment. They were paying Sheen more than ever while he publicly criticized their bikes and demanded changes they didn't want to make. The relationship had become toxic on both sides. Sheen felt betrayed by equipment decisions and ignored warnings. Suzuki felt held hostage by a rider who demanded a massive salary while publicly embarrassing them. Neither side was willing to compromise, neither side trusted the other anymore. The partnership that had won 2 world championships was falling apart in the most public way possible. For the 1980 season, Sheen demanded a separate team operating out of his home, otherwise he was going to Yamaha. Suzuki called his bluff and said, "Off you go then." This was the moment their patience officially ended. They'd rather lose their champion than accommodate his demands for better equipment and development support. So after 6 years together, 2 world championships and 18 Grand Prix victories, the partnership was over. And what Sheen did next stunned everyone. He actually left. He walked away from Suzuki and went to their biggest competitor. After the 1979 season, Sheen left Suzuki believing he was receiving inferior equipment to his teammates. He made the decision to switch to Yamaha for 1980. There was no dramatic announcement, no public fight. Sheen simply chose to leave, and Suzuki let him go without making any serious effort to keep him. Think about what that means. Suzuki's 2-time world champion, still winning races, still marketable, still only 29 years old, walked away. And the factory that had paid him more than any other rider in history didn't fight to stop him. That's not normal turnover. That's calculated disengagement. Sheen campaigned on a privateer Yamaha in 1980, but Yamaha remembered his outspoken criticism of their motorcycle back in 1972 and withheld their best machinery for Kenny Roberts. So Sheen spent 1980 racing obsolete equipment from a manufacturer that didn't trust him, having left a manufacturer that had stopped supporting him. He went from 3rd in the championship in 1979 to 15th in 1980. The results weren't that Sheen had suddenly forgotten how to ride. They were because politics and grudges mattered more than talent. The 1980 season was brutal for Sheen. He showed up to races knowing he had no chance of winning. The bike wasn't competitive, the support wasn't there. Other riders with factory equipment would pass him on straights like he was standing still. Fans who'd worshipped him during his championship years now watched him struggle at the back of the pack. It was humiliating for a rider who dominated Grand Prix racing just 3 years earlier. Meanwhile, back at Suzuki, something interesting was happening. The customer version of their race bike became the motorcycle of choice for privateer racers including Phil Reed, Marco Lucinelli, and Randy Mamola. Ironically, privateer teams racing customer Suzukis were more successful than the factory effort had been with Sheen. In 1981, Suzuki riders Marco Lucinelli and Randy Mamola finished 1st and 2nd in the World Championship. Both were racing bikes Sheen had helped develop before leaving. Suzuki's message was clear. The brand was bigger than any one rider. Championships could be won without expensive superstars making demands, and outspoken champions who criticized management decisions could be replaced with quieter riders who followed orders. Sheen continued with Yamaha through 1981 and 1982, scoring occasional podiums but never recapturing championship form. Then in 1982, something happened that would force Sheen to make the most humiliating decision of his entire career. In 1982, Sheen suffered a massive crash at Silverstone that would have killed most people. Both legs shattered, one arm broken. His body was destroyed. Yamaha didn't want him anymore at the end of the season. For 1983, he had to go back to Suzuki, the team he'd sworn never to ride for again. By then, Suzuki's race bike was undeveloped. The factory was winding down their Grand Prix effort, and they weren't paying Sheen much money, if at all. He was back at Suzuki on equipment that couldn't win, in pain every day, and he hated his situation. This was the ultimate reversal. 4 years earlier, Suzuki had paid him more than anyone in racing. Now they were giving him outdated equipment and minimal salary to ride out a contract. The 1983 season was a disaster. Sheen struggled with bikes that couldn't compete in a body that hadn't fully recovered from the Silverstone crash. When he returned to Suzuki, he was very unhappy with the bike they'd given him. Chassis builders had to construct custom frames just to make it rideable. Even with modifications, the results never came. Sheen limped through 1983 and retired permanently in 1984. The contrast between 1977 and 1983 couldn't be starker. 6 years separated those seasons. In 1977, Sheen was a world champion with unlimited factory support, earning a fortune and dictating his own terms. In 1983, he was a broken rider on broken equipment, accepting whatever Suzuki was willing to give just to keep racing. That transformation wasn't about age or injury or even loss of skill. It was about what happens when factories decide a rider has stopped being useful. And here's the part nobody talks about. There's a reason Suzuki was willing to let Sheen go, and it has everything to do with behavior that would get any rider fired today. Barry Sheene captured 18 500cc Grand Prix victories with Suzuki. In 1976 and 1977, he won the World Championship, making him the most successful Suzuki rider in the Premier class. No other Suzuki rider had won 2 World Championships in the top category. Those statistics looked impressive in Suzuki's corporate history. What they don't show is why Suzuki was so willing to let him go. In the early days, Sheen would literally sell works parts from his teammates' bikes. Team members like Tom Herron would discover they had no wheels or suspension units at races because Sheen had sold them. Japanese technicians would spot pieces of works equipment on privateer bikes that Sheen had sold for cash. This behavior should have got him fired. Instead, Suzuki tolerated it because he was winning. The same actions that made Sheen impossible to work with also made him valuable enough to protect. This wasn't occasional behavior. This was systematic. Sheen saw factory parts as assets he could liquidate for personal profit. He'd negotiate deals in paddocks, selling suspension components to privateers who desperately needed competitive equipment. The money went straight into his pocket. His teammates would show up for practice sessions missing critical components. Suzuki's Japanese engineers would be horrified to discover their proprietary technology on competing bikes. But as long as Sheen kept winning championships, management looked the other way. But once Roberts proved championships could be won without tolerating this behavior, the calculation changed. Why deal with a rider who sold team parts, criticized management decisions, and demanded ever-increasing salaries when quieter riders could deliver the same results? The answer was you didn't. You let them leave and replace them with someone easier to manage. Kenny Roberts reflected later, saying he wouldn't be Kenny Roberts without Barry Sheene. That acknowledgement from his greatest rival showed the respect Sheen commanded from other riders. But respect from competitors doesn't pay salaries or dictate team strategy. Suzuki chose corporate control over rider respect, and that choice defined their relationship with Sheen's legacy. And that's the explosive truth behind Barry Sheene's 1979 exit from Suzuki. He gave them 2 world championships and global recognition. They gave him equipment he'd rejected and ignored his warnings about mechanical problems. When he demanded better support, they let him walk away without a fight. The Silverstone race proved he still had the speed to win championships. The points table proved Suzuki had stopped caring whether he did, and the quiet departure after the season proved corporate control always matters more than individual achievement. If this story changed how you see factory racing relationships, hit that like button. And if you want to see more videos about how manufacturers really treat their champions, subscribe and turn on notifications.